What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Katson's Corner, the show where we talk about what's going on in college football and how that relates to the Los Angeles Chargers, who have won a 6-0 game over the New England Patriots on Sunday to get back into maybe the playoff picture. Probably not. We can probably just ignore that, especially for the purposes of this show. But theoretically, back in it. Um, it's a big week for the Chargers. It's been a big week for college football. Conference championship week was this week. Some big time decisions. Obviously, some controversy with the playoff, but no controversy with my alma mater, the University of Washington. Sco Dogs, baby, number 2 seed. Going to be a fun game with Texas. We'll talk about the playoff games a little bit later here on this show, I think. Still have about 3 weeks, 4 weeks until those games kick off. So, not going to preview those too early for you guys. Instead, this week we are going to talk about a few players that we have not gotten to this season for whatever reason, either because they were playing poor schedules or were just kind of like overshadowed by other guys that we talked about throughout the course of the season. But just going to cover some guys, go through. We have 6 players that I want to talk about this week. Just going to go through, give kind of like a quick lowdown on each of them and kind of how I think they fit for the Chargers. Before we do that, make sure you guys do all the YouTube stuff. You guys know the deal at this point. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you are somehow not already. Hit the notification bell so that you get all the episodes with Steven, Tyler, Alex, Arjun, me. Make sure you go over to the Chargers channel, subscribe, hit the bell over there too, so that you get those episodes with Steven and Tyler that come out every week. If you want to follow me specifically, my Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, handle is at Alex Katson. Same way you see my name spelled on the screen here. I will be ramping up draft content here soon. I'm currently occupied with trying to track the transfer portal because I'm a masochist. But that's just how it goes sometimes. Got to know which guys are transferring before I figure out which guys are going to be in the draft, because a lot of the guys that are transferring are guys that I thought were going to be in the draft, and instead they're going to be in college football next year. So been busy with that, but we're going to ramp up draft content here pretty soon. Hope you guys follow along with all of that on my personal Twitter as well. We are going to go ahead and get into it here. We're going to start off with Graham Barton from Duke. This is a name that you guys have probably heard in the last couple of weeks. Dane Brugler from The Athletic put him in the first round of his latest mock draft that came out. It was either, I guess it was last week at this point. Today's Monday. So his mock draft last week. Barton is a guy who has been pretty firmly on my radar the entire season. We haven't talked about Duke a ton this year. They haven't really had any games that the Chargers have visited, haven't really like played any like solid teams where I thought that it was like worth previewing the matchup a ton. But talking about him here, he is the left tackle for Duke this season. He's been the left tackle since 2021, but he did start, I think it's either 5 or 6 games at center back as a freshman. He was kind of an injury replacement. It was kind of a last-minute deal. That Duke team that year dealt with a ton of injuries. I believe it's the same year that Riley Leonard ended up playing quarterback because they had a bunch of injuries at quarterback. Barton ends up coming in and playing in center, does fairly well. There are some older guys ahead of him, so he kicks out to tackle where he's stuck the past few seasons. But he has a Senior Bowl invite, and Jim Nagy, the director of the Senior Bowl, has already said that they're going to kick him inside in the Senior Bowl, and that he's going to play a decent amount of center while he's down there in Mobile. Nagy has also said that he thinks that Barton will be close to, if not the top center prospect in the draft, which is probably half true and half him pumping up a guy that has already accepted an invite. The other guys that are in that mix, Zach Frazier has a Senior Bowl invite, but he broke his leg in West Virginia's final game of the regular season, so he's probably not going to be participating. And Cedric Van Pran is still playing meaningful football games, not anymore because Georgia's out of the playoff, but he was busy with the SEC championship, and so he has not accepted any All-Star invite yet. So Nagy is, of course, going to pump up his guy that has already accepted an invite. So part of that is for that reason, but part of it is because Barton is a very good player. I do think that there's a legitimate consideration for him to be the top center drafted if he ends up playing center full time. I think a lot of teams are going to see him as a guard as well. Probably not going to be a whole lot of teams that see him as a tackle. His arms come in at 32 and 5/8 inches, which is a little bit short of that 33-inch threshold that you usually see from NFL teams. But what's going to attract him to teams as an interior convert is his explosiveness off the line of scrimmage and his strength as a run blocker. He's one of those guys that fires off the ball really quickly, is super explosive, and that generates a lot of power in addition to the natural power that he already has. And so he gets into the second level pretty quickly, especially on run plays, and is able to pretty much eliminate a linebacker, a safety, guys coming down into the box on some of these run concepts. That's a guy that you love to have as a guard or as a center, someone that still has that ability, but is on the inside and can kind of like execute a quick combo block and then get up to the second level quick enough to seal off a lane. That is a fantastic trait to have on the interior. So he's going to be very coveted in that sense. In pass protection, I do have some concerns about how varied his timing is with his hands. I think he's a little bit inconsistent with his punches in pass protection, which can leave him susceptible to some pretty nasty pass rush moves. It's more of a problem at tackle than it will be in the interior, I think. In the interior, you don't have guys that are, as quick or as, kind of nimble with that sort of stuff. But in the NFL, we've started to see more and more of those guys crop up that do have those traits. So that's something to keep an eye on. The pass protection is kind of a work in progress with him. And then also for the Chargers in particular, I think that they're going to have some questions about his experience at center. I do think that if the Chargers were looking at Barton, they'd be looking at him as a center. We've talked about the need at center a few times on this show, with Corey Linsley probably not returning to the sport of football next season because of that heart issue that has him on the non-football illness list. Will Clapp is a fine stopgap, but I don't know if you want to go into 2024 with him as a penciled-in starter. And so are you comfortable taking a guy like Barton, who has only played 6 college games of center that were 3 or 4 seasons ago, and then played center in an all-star game format where you still have to execute and you still have to do all those things, but it's not quite the same as playing it over the course of a full season. Is that something that you're going to be comfortable with, especially knowing that he's already kind of a work in progress as a pass protector? I'm not really sure where the Chargers are going to fall on that, but I think that it's worth keeping an eye on, something to kind of keep track of, because I do think that he's going to be a guy that is potentially available with the Chargers' second round pick, depending on how high they end up picking in the draft. Moving on here to Kentucky cornerback Andrew Phillips. While I was combing through the guys that declared for the draft over this past weekend, I came across Phillips declaring. He is a redshirt junior. I was not super familiar with his name when he declared, and so it was a little bit surprising to me. And then I went and I checked my resource sheet that I have from this summer, and I saw that he has 4th round grades from NFL scouts from the summer, which confused me even more, because I was like, well, why have I never heard of this guy then? Why didn't I hear about him all season? And the reason, I think, is because Phillips is one of those guys that is going to get drafted for his athleticism and his build more so than his production. He's kind of a theoretical corner more than he is a corner right now. He does have NFL caliber length and agility. I found an interview with Jim Nagy, again, the executive director of the Senior Bowl, that talked about Phillips in October, talking about how he does have that kind of blend of length and agility that you want from an NFL corner. He also has the versatility to play inside or outside. Will kick down into the slot in key situations depending on the personnel package that Kentucky is running. Has played a ton of special teams. He's actually been mostly a special teamer for most of his career. Last year was really the first season where he played on defense. And so you are going to have some questions in terms of this is a guy who coming into 2023 had played more than 100 defensive snaps one time in a season. And it was last season, I'm pretty sure. If it wasn't last season, then it was 2021. Played a ton this year, but didn't really do a ton to pop onto people's radars. That doesn't mean that he's not good. It might just mean that the Dane Bruglers and the Nate Tices and those the kind of movers of the draft community just haven't gotten to him yet, and then they're going to write an article about him in February right before the combine because he gets an invite, and then all of a sudden everyone is going to say oh, this is my favorite sleeper corner in the draft, because that does happen. But it doesn't mean that he's bad. It just means that it's an interesting choice. We've seen guys do this before. Cornerback is a position where a lot of these guys end up doing this. You get a couple of these surprise kind of declarations every single season. Last year, you had Deonte Banks, who at the time when he declared was kind of thought of as like a second, third round pick, wasn't really like a big hot name that people knew when he declared. And he ended up being a first round pick, went, 25th overall to the Giants. A couple years ago, you had Cordell Flott from LSU, who kind of did the same thing, declared very quietly, ended up like not testing a ton. There was still some confusion about whether or not he was in the draft by the time the draft actually rolled around. He ends up getting drafted in like the fourth round again by the Giants. And so there's a couple of guys like this every season that kind of just like randomly pop up, and you're like, oh, he declared? Uh, Interesting. That's weird. I guess I have to go back and watch him now, and that's kind of the boat that I'm in with Phillips now is, oh, I guess I have to go back and watch him. But coming through kind of like some preliminary stuff, he brings a ton of special teams value. He's got that inside-outside versatility. He's an inconsistent anticipator. He's pretty prone to big plays, even though he has the athleticism to make up for those and like prevent those from happening. I think that that's just a lack of experience thing. Again, he's going to be someone that gets drafted off of athleticism, not off of production. And you're going to hope that you can get him into the building and coach him up and kind of like turn him into an actual defensive back while he plays special teams kind of to start out. I think that's a guy that the Chargers have been willing to throw a flyer on in the past. Obviously, you've seen like Dean Leonard is kind of like that and has worked out so far as kind of like a special teamer who ends up getting thrust in there at corner after a year or two of development and has played relatively well given the expectations for him. And so that is a guy that the Chargers have like shown a willingness to take a flyer on before. And so I think for that reason, Phillips is a name to keep an eye on, especially as the draft process gets going here. He'll probably end up at the combine and all that stuff. So someone to kind of file away for a little bit later. Moving on here to Cameron Kitchens, the safety from Miami. This is a name that, again, you guys probably know. He's in the first round or close to it in most mock drafts. I know PFF is really high on him in particular. And so that's a name that has definitely been floated around this cycle. He was Brugler's safety one coming into the summer and then dropped out of Brugler's top 50 in for the October or November update. I'm not quite sure where he is now if Brugler's released a more recent top 50 than that. But he's still in the conversation for safety one. I think you have him and Tyler Nubin from Minnesota, a couple other guys that are still in that conversation. Kitchens is a 3-year starter. He started as a true freshman. That's always something that you like to see from a position that requires as many instincts as safety does. His big calling card is that he is a true center fielder with the ball in the air. He has the athleticism and the range and the instincts and and the play recognition. You see that next bullet point, that plus play recognition. He has all of those traits that like the ball gets in the air and he is able to erase an entire half of the field. That is his bread and butter. He's a super productive guy around the ball. That's going to be his best use case. Now, the problems come when he gets downhill. He's a guy that takes some pretty poor tackling angles. He's very aggressive. And that's kind of why some of those angles are so poor. He's so aggressive, especially in run support, that he will overrun plays so easily. Like loves to do it. Will overrun every single play if you let him. We've seen that with the Chargers defense this season being a problem. And so I'm curious to see how much they value a guy that does not do that over, kind of this like flashy highlight package that he's going to put together because Kitchens is a huge hitter. He's got the ball production. If you just watch highlight tapes, this is a first round player. If you watch entire games, then you start to see some of those blemishes where like he's taking bad angles to the ball. He's getting caught with his eyes in the backfield a little bit too much because he's trying to make a play instead of just like doing the boring thing and like being solid and not having the ball thrown his way. I think that he's a guy. This is an adage that gets applied to quarterbacks a lot. But like there's a lot of quarterbacks where you say like you need to coach him to be content with boring. It's something that's come up with like Josh Allen a ton, right? Of like Josh Allen is this huge playmaker and he wants to make a big play on every single down. And you have to coach into guys like that. You have to take the boring plays. You can't get bored with efficiency. You can't get bored with success, right? You can't get bored with like hitting a double or hitting a single every time instead of hitting a home run every time. And I think that that applies to Kinchins too. You need to coach him down to kind of say like, "Hey, we love this aggressiveness, and we don't want to take like sap that from you, but also like you need to tap into that play recognition and that athleticism that you have, and like be content with shutting down half of the field and not having the ball thrown your way. You need to be content with coming down and stopping this run, keeping contained on this run and either not making a tackle or, stopping it for a 3 or 4 yard gain instead of like trying to shoot a gap and take this guy down for a loss of 4 yards. You just have to do the easy stuff. You have to do the simple stuff. And I think for that reason, Kitchens is someone that I'm really interested to see where he lands in the draft, especially from a Chargers perspective, because I think that he's someone that will get into the second round. And I think that he's someone that could be available when the Chargers pick. Safety is not as big of a need as some of the other things on the roster, but it is still something worth looking at, especially with the kind of like sentiment around the Derwin James contract right now, in terms of like potentially moving on from him for cap space reasons. Alohi Gilman has played great, and I think that that's kind of like quieted the need for a second safety next to James. But now the conversation has sort of shifted to, well, are they going to keep James next season because of the cap situation that they're in, and because like some of those other guys that we kind of wrote off as cap casualties going into the season have played well enough that maybe they've warranted returning to the team. And so I think safety is still going to be something that's going to be in a little bit of flux. If Kitchens is available in the second round, I'll be interested to see how the Chargers value that. Moving on here to Troy Franklin, the Oregon receiver. Again, this is a name that I know you guys know because you guys ask me about him all the time. We have not talked about him on this show yet, somehow. We've talked about Oregon a ton, but we've mostly talked about Oregon in the context of Bucky Irving, the running back, and Jackson Powers Johnson, the center. We have not talked about the wide receivers very much. We haven't talked about the defense very much. We've talked about the defense a little bit, but not very much. And we haven't really touched on the receivers. There's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that I don't want you guys to be mad at me because I don't like Troy Franklin very much. I think that he's a good player. I think that the first round conversation that was kind of like getting thrown around about him in like October and November and so is a little bit rich for me. I think that he's a second, maybe a third round player. He kind of reminds me of Jalen Hyatt in the draft stock sort of way. I'm not saying that they're similar players, but just in the same sort of like draft stock sort of way where like he makes a lot of these big flashy plays and he's a fast guy and so he like wins a lot of go balls and he does all this stuff. And so people are tempted to put him in the first round because he's got good highlights. And again, kind of like with Kinchins, you watch the full games and you go, I think I got to move this guy down a round or two. Franklin, to his credit, I don't mean to just trash this guy because I do think he's a good player and I think that he's going to be a really good NFL player. He has inside outside experience. He can play in the slot. He can play Z receiver. He can do either one of those things. He's got elite acceleration. He's got a great release package. Really, like you'd think that for such like a slender guy that like pressing him would just be the answer, but his footwork is so advanced in his release packages that he's able to just like cross up defenders at the line of scrimmage if they're not able to get hands on him immediately. And then he's just by him and he's gone. I do want him to see him incorporate his hands a little bit more in those release packages because in the NFL, corners are going to be a lot more physical with him than they are in the Pac-12. And so like that's not going to work every time, I don't think. Which kind of like also like brings me down a little bit on him. He does have some experience as a returner. There's not a ton at Oregon, but he was a big time returner in high school. And in the Bay Area, and that experience does flash in his yards after catch ability. You see kind of like that creativity and that vision of like some guys just have that like kind of like mapping out a route around all of these blockers and through all these tacklers and stuff. Some people you can just tell like have that kind of like pathing in their brain. And Franklin is one of those guys. If you get him the ball in his hands with opportunity to run after the catch, he's going to maximize it pretty much every time because he just has that innate ability to see like where he needs to go and how it's going to set up. his blockers and how it's going to set up tacklers to like take a wrong angle or run into a blocker or something like that. He just has that ability. Um, my struggle with him is that he's got poor play strength. He's only like 175, 185 pounds, I think. I want to see him add a little bit more weight just to like get stronger a little bit, but I'm worried about how much that weight will take away from his speed. But I want him to add a little bit more pop there, especially because again, like in the NFL, those press corners are going to be a lot more physical with him. They're going to get hands on him. They're going to knock him off of his routes. They're going to be knocking him around at the stem. I want to see him be able to withstand that contact. And with the ball in the air, I think he's just a little bit passive sometimes. I don't even necessarily mean like contested catch like at the catch point. He's like not going up for balls and stuff. I just mean like there are some times where I just want him to come back to the ball. Like he's just waiting for the ball to come to him, and then a defender will step in front of him and knock it away instead of him just like coming like 2 or 3 steps back to the ball and making that catch and then running around that guy like you see a bunch of receivers do. And so I think he's a good player, but not a great one. And so I kind of struggle with him. I think I'm going to end up having him probably in the second round somewhere. He's still pretty firmly in that second tier receivers for me after that big top four. He's going to be in the conversation for wide receiver five. I think that everyone that you talk to is going to have a different wide receiver five this season because of how many different styles of guys and how many different like nuanced little things that you're going to have to get down to as far as tiebreakers with those guys. For me, I don't think Franklin is going to end up as five, but I think he's going to be probably in that like 6, 7, 8 range where it's still very close. And I still think he's a great player. But he's just like, to me, he's just not like a day one difference maker, if that makes sense. Moving on here, we've got Frank Gore Jr., the running back from Southern Miss. Yes, that Frank Gore. We are old. Frank Gore also old, but Frank Gore Jr. is going to be in the NFL next season. I was really interested to see that he declared. I thought that he was going to transfer up from Southern Miss. Southern Miss was abysmal this season. They have pretty much no talent on that team outside of Frank Gore. And so I really thought that he was going to transfer up, maybe transfer to a Power Five program and show what he could do a little bit there. Instead, he just declared with a year of eligibility left, which good for him. I'm excited to see how that goes. For running backs, you got to make business decisions like that. It gets tough. So I totally understand it from that perspective. Um, when you watch him play, you can tell that he has the instincts of a guy who grew up the son of an NFL running back, especially the son of a great NFL running back like Frank Gore. He is another one of those guys that just has that like pathing ability in his brain, except that he has it in like such tighter quarters because Southern Miss is really not blocking a ton of plays open for him. There's not a ton of room at the line of scrimmage for him to do things. He's got excellent contact balance, especially for a smaller guy. He's only 5'8", 195. Sub 200 pounds is usually pretty rough projection wise for running backs. We've seen a couple guys come into the league, especially this season, like you have Jameer Gibbs and Devon Achane, both under 200 pounds. Both of them have gotten injured this year. Achane has gotten injured twice. And so a guy that's sub 200 pounds, you have some concerns about his durability in the NFL. But Gore doesn't show any ill effects of it in college, at least. Like I said, he's got great contact balance. And so he's someone that's kind of just like bouncing off those tacklers, very reminiscent of some of these other guys that have come into the league in recent years as kind of like smaller guys, like Gibbs or I don't know why I just spaced his name, Achan, or even like a Keaton Mitchell with the Ravens. Um, the thing with Gore is that he's not particularly elusive. He's kind of either he will run past you or he will try to run through you, but he will not run around you. And so if you're able to stay in front of him and kind of like cut off his like path to the sideline or path up the seam or something, he will just try to run through you, and he's not big enough to do that in the NFL. I think that he's someone that's going to be like a day 3 pick. I do think that he's going to be a valuable NFL back. I think he's probably going to be like a 1B in a committee where you ask him to do a little bit more like receiving type stuff. Um, and so that's someone that the Chargers could definitely be in the market for, especially in like the the 5th or 6th round, depending on how things shake out. If they decide to address other needs a little bit further up and maybe like add a cheap free agent running back, I could see Gore being someone that they have their eye on in kind of like the later rounds. Last one here, Western Michigan edge Marshon Neal. This is a guy who got a Senior Bowl invite about a month ago, and when he got the Senior Bowl invite, everyone's reaction was pretty much like, "I don't know who this is." Um, I was also not super familiar with him when he got the Senior Bowl invite. I went and I dug into my research on him, and I found out that he's the reason that he fell off my radar is because he transferred to Colorado last December, and then I think during spring practice or at some point, just like ended up back at Western Michigan and then changed his jersey number. So you see in this picture, he's number 94. This is before he transferred. He transfers to Colorado, uh, does not like register at Colorado really at all, and ends up re-entering the portal, coming back to Western Michigan, and then changing his number to number 99. Um, this is something that really only affects scouts and stuff, like people that watch a bunch of tape and people that watch a bunch of like 2022 tape, especially because like when a guy changes their number, a lot of times you're not watching for a name, you're watching for a number. You know, you get recommended like, oh, Western Michigan 94, he's a really good player. And then you go back and you watch, and then you're like, you watch the 2023 tape and you're like, well, where'd he go? I don't see him anywhere. And then you find out that he leaves and he comes back and he changes his number to 99. And then you realize as you're watching the film, like, oh yeah, 99. Yeah, that looks like the same guy. He's really good. Um, he's going to be down in Mobile. He's someone that Nagy has talked about as kind of like one of their big sleeper invites this year. He's kind of a hybrid sort of guy, plays a lot of down linemen at Western Michigan. They run a 4 down front. And so he does a lot of that. He does stand up occasionally as kind of like an outside linebacker type guy. I think that he's going to be more of an outside linebacker in the NFL just because he's a little bit light. He's roughly like 260, 270, I think. Pretty solid run defender. As a pass rusher, I do want to see him add some more counters and stuff. He pretty much just tries to win with a long arm because he's got power for the MAC. I don't think that's going to work as consistently in the NFL. I think that it's going to be something that you want him to see. You want to see him add a little bit more to that toolbox and add some stuff that he can kind of chain off of that to win in other ways. Um, and then he is a little bit slow to recognize plays. Sometimes he can be just like one or two ticks, just a little bit behind the action. I think that's again just like something that comes with experience and something that comes with like playing NFL football a little bit more with guys from like conferences like the MAC and like G5 conferences and lower level conferences. There's always a discussion about like how much NFL caliber coaching will kind of like unlock some of their potential. And it's not that coaches at that level are bad, right? It's not that coaches at the FCS level or at the G5 level are bad coaches. It's more just about like there are resources available to you in the NFL that are simply not available to you at Western Michigan. That's just the fact of the matter. And so there's always going to be questions with guys like Nealand and guys like Quinyon Mitchell at Toledo and stuff like that about like how much more can you get out of a player once you get him into an NFL room. I do think that Nealand is someone that the Chargers will be interested in if they kind of keep the same sort of defensive scheme on the front end that they have right now. They love those kind of like hybrid guys that can put their hand in the dirt or stand up as a rusher, especially for like that NASCAR package with Mac and Bosa before he got injured and Thule, where they have two of those guys standing up and one of those guys down as kind of an quote unquote interior lineman. And so I think Nealand will be someone that they probably have some interest in. I think he'll probably end up going higher than the Chargers will be comfortable with. But he's someone to keep an eye on, someone that I'm really excited to see in Mobile to see how he performs. But yeah, that's going to do it for this week. No preview this week because there's actually only one game this weekend, and it's Army Navy, which doesn't really have a ton of prospects in it because it's Army Navy. But we'll get into bowl season next week with the first bowls coming up on the 16th. And like I said, we'll do some episodes kind of previewing the playoffs, some guys that I think you guys should watch for the Chargers in particular. And so that'll kind of be the blueprint for the next couple weeks here. I hope you guys enjoyed kind of like this catch-up scouting episode. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know if you've watched any of these guys, what you think of them, and if you have any ideas for guys I should talk about that I haven't gotten to yet this season. We'll do another one of these episodes in a little bit. But until then, I will see you guys next time. Bolt up, baby.